Alright, welcome to the presentation for Team 22078, or as we like to call ourselves, Team Is This a Date? Our project is on creating an alcoholic beverage from the excess biomass from date production. Our project goal was to find an economical use for the excess biomass that comes from date production, and we chose that the simplest and effective method to do this was fermenting that biomass to make an alcoholic beverage. Our primary objectives in this endeavor are to make a good tasting alcoholic beverage that we can sell on the market potentially, and then a process that can be scaled up to industrial levels and may over time be used to get rid of all the excess biomass that they have. In this process, we want to have something that costs a minimal amount and produces minimal waste, because we want to have a profitable effort here, and we also want to make sure we're not producing more waste than we are actually getting rid of. Alright, so what exactly is our excess biomass that we're using? So in the date making process, there's a sorting and grading part at the end, where they file out all of the dates that aren't exactly good enough for them to sell. And that accounts for about 5% of all of the dates they grow. And in total, they're growing 15 million pounds of dates every year. So they have 5% that they can actually use. We're getting a fifth of that. So 1% of their total date product is what we would be using in our process. These dates are being grown in Yuma, Arizona. They're probably harvested between the months of September and December, depending on when they really ripen. And this company that's growing them is Bard Valley Natural Delights, and our mentor was supplied to us by them. His name is Manu Dako. He's the director of innovation there. He has been giving us insight about our project throughout, and he was one who first suggested the idea of making wine, actually, since his specialty was in making wine. Another person we've been working with is Todd Nosal. He's a winemaker at Dos Cabezas Wineworks in Sonoma, Arizona. He's actually helped us make 2 batches of wine, and he's been giving us good guidance throughout our project as well.
Oh, hello. I didn't notice you there. Let me tell you about our experimental batches. We did 2 experimental batches from pitted dates and unpitted dates. Both were added with 5 gallons of hot water and left to sit for 2 days, so that way we could extract as much sugars as possible. We then added tartaric acid, potassium sulfate, as well as our yeast and nutrient slurry to the fermentation vessels, and let them sit for 4 days as complete fermentation. From there, we used layered cheesecloth to filter out the massive date solids, and then racked the wine twice to get rid of any yeast sediment as well as any excess date solids. From there, we had a final wine product.
Throughout the fermentation process, we took Brix measurements to keep track of our sugar consumption of the fermentation process. Brix is a measurement of the sugar concentration of the fluid. From there, we were able to find what the sugar concentration was throughout a given time during the fermentation process and see how much sugar was being consumed. From there, we took this data and used the integrated rate law to plot both 0, first, and second order processes. We found that 0th order was the best fit, but given literature, we know that fermentation process is a first order reaction. So we used first order to find the rate law. So our conclusions for our experimental batch. We ran into a number of process issues, the greatest being filtration and clogging of the keg, which would increase difficulty in cleaning of the keg. To solve this, we decided that we would use cheesecloth filter bags in our actual process, and then incorporate a press to hopefully compensate for any lost product. We also found that the final flavor profile of the wine was unsatisfactory for our criteria. We had a higher ABV than predicted, as well as insufficient residual sugars. We plan to resolve this by changing the type of yeast that we use, that will cap out around 12% ABV rather than the 15% that our experimental batch was in, as well as maybe including a date syrup added for the final product, so that way we have higher residual sugars for our end product.
Block flow diagram, or BFD, for our project has generally remained the same throughout the year. One big difference is the way that the dates are added into the wine. After testing the wine recipe, it became obvious that the date pulp needed to be contained in order for easy removal for our final product. This is why we included a date sock to contain the dates while they are fermenting with the water, yeast, and tartaric acid. After fermentation, the wine will go through a series of presses and filters to ensure that there is no date pulp, yeast, or acid particles in the final product. Finally, the wine goes through a heat exchanger to chill it for aging and carbonation. Process flow diagram, or PFD, shows the BFD in more detail. We first have the water and dates combining through a filter into a date sock to contain the pulp. This is then added into the fermentation vessel with yeast, acid, and potassium sulfate. The sock is then removed and the solids are pressed for any remaining liquid. Then all the liquid is sent into the filters. There are 3 filters in series to give the smallest amount of unwanted particles in the final product. Finally, it is sent to a heat exchanger running with ethylene glycol to chill the wine down for carbonation. Our overall process breakdown includes the tedious time to prepare the raw minerals of dates, yeast, and acid. This is why we included the date stalk to contain some of the pulp in the final product. The fermentation process ended up being faster than anticipated, reaching our goal alcohol by volume of 12% in a matter of 3 days. The filtration, the most difficult and time-consuming part of the process, was partially because of the lack of the date stalk. The soupy mess was filtered and re-racked 3 times. Finally, carbonation was tested using a soda stream for quality of final product to be sold. We scaled the process from our 1 15-gallon tank with 30 pounds of dates to use all of the wasted dates in one season. The total amount of dates in one season is 150,000 pounds, and we will need 49 15-gallon tanks in use at one time in order to use all of the excess waste. The winery will be located in Yuma, Arizona, where Bard Valley grows their dates.
Now we're going to go over some safety risks and hazards associated with our process. One of the main safety hazards for winemaking in general is confined spaces. There's a confined space OSHA, which is 1910.164, and this deals with permit required confined spaces. Because of winemaking is done in a small room, there's chances that with all the equipment and workers, there can be bumps causing damage to equipment or harm to workers. So we need to be aware of that. Another risk we have is due to our winery being in Yuma, Arizona. Yuma, Arizona gets hot and fermentation is a reaction, so there's possibility that we could have a runaway reaction and produce more CO2 than we anticipated. This can cause a pressure buildup in our tanks, which could lead to explosions or burst. In order to prevent this, we need to have burp valves or just any sort of release valve. The other issue that we could have is ethylene glycol, our refrigerant used for the cooling process, can be a carcinogen if ingested or inhaled. So workers need to take extra care when dealing with this process.
So now we're going to talk about economic and environmental factors. Some economic factors are basically this is a large amount of dates that Bard Valley Growers isn't using. So we are trying to bring in money for this company. One of the major hazards that we could be facing is that date wine doesn't really have a big market. There's a few date wine sellers that are currently already there, and they're not really like booming, and there's not a lot of interest in that. But so we're planning on selling this wine for $13.99, which is to be with competitive prices. This results in a total profit of $354.76 per batch. And our refrigerant can be reused, so that doesn't lead to the extra cost. This gives us a total of $1.2 million going back to Bard Valley Growers a year. So this will be an economically profitable endeavor for them. Environmental factors, date waste, when it's not properly gotten rid of, it can lead to eutrophication and just contamination of soil and livestock due to the fact that dates don't really fall apart well, and they attract a lot of flies and just things that can become bad for the environment. So by getting rid of this date waste, we can help the nearby community by making sure their soil is in good condition.
We would like to give special thanks to our mentor, Mahmoud Dako, and to the industry expert who helped us through this project, Todd Bostock.